Welcome to Nobody Knows Anything. Today we bring on a Republican strategist, spooky, scary, to tell us everything we don't know about the Republican Party. We take a look at the GOP's view of the midterms, the presidential, and the TV reservation wars, the most consequential thing in news today. And then we will exchange views on the things we don't understand about each other's political parties. All that and more today on Nobody Knows Anything.
Nobody knows anything.
Well, folks, we have our first ever guest here on Nobody Knows Anything in person in the Pain Cave. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome Liam Donovan, an esteemed Republican strategist from the firm Targeted Victory. Liam, welcome to the show. I'm so sorry that you decided to spend this time with us when you could have been doing literally anything else.
You told me nobody would be watching, so I can say what anything. It's a good sandbox for me, but I appreciate it.
Can confirm, yeah. Road test your stuff that you want real people to see.
100%. Really, all of that. So, Liam, talk your book for 30 seconds. Who are you? Where'd you come from? What's your background? Republican extraordinaire.
Yeah, I'd say I am a recovering lobbyist. I started my career on the campaign side, working at the Republican Senatorial Committee. Seen a really rough cycle in 08, saw a really good one in 2010. Went into the advocacy arena, so lobbying for a variety of industries and companies for about 15 years. Built up a Twitter presence on the back end, writing and talking, and then got away from the game. I think things have changed so fundamentally in the Trump era that I think the way power is moving, the way the media is operating, the way distribution works. I think this is a good example of it. I feel like the puck's moving in a different direction. So I switched over to Targeted Victory last year, kind of less lobbying per se and more zooming out and looking at public affairs in a holistic way. And so excited to be here.
And Targeted Victory is a public affairs shop, kind of came out of digital, came out of Mitt Romney 12, right?
That's
Zach
right. That's right.
All that.
Zach Moffat and Abe Adams and Ryan Mearstein started this firm and built it into kind of a mammoth digital consultancy on the campaign side, and then in the more later iteration built it into kind of a corporate public affairs operation, and kind of came over recently to build out what that looks like at the kind of higher end strategic C-suite level.
Right on. So if you hear that, America, digital consultancy started by losers of presidential campaigns can be successful. All right? It can be fine.
You're doing just fine, buddy.
No, I'm on a podcast of 100 people. Anyway, look, we also want to apologize. We are having some slight internet issues. So the feed may come, it may go. But we'll have the whole thing up on YouTube shortly after, so please stay with us and pardon our dust. So we start with one of the biggest questions that is standing before us, which is what is going on with Donald Trump? Donald Trump having, at least from our view, a bit of a rough week. His net approval from Nate Silver down net negative 18. Those are Biden numbers, baby. We are. So he's having a little bit of a struggle. I think that like some of this is just the natural like where a president is in this particular moment, but there is sort of something going on that people are really mad about. Like, what do you make of this, from the Republican side of like where his numbers are? How much of it is just where he is? How much of it is, factors that were in his control?
I think what you said is a good point, which is this is kind of the natural flow of things. If you think about the fifth and sixth year of a presidency, that kind of is where people get worn out. The difference here is for the first time in 125 years, we actually had an interrupted presidency. People kind of forgot about the weariness of the first 4 years. He kind of got a fresh look and a fresh shot. I do think that things have gotten challenging for him for a variety of reasons more quickly than you might have expected. But if you think about it as an uninterrupted, not even just 5-6 years, but really decade, I think that explains it to some degree. I mean, that is real deterioration. But think about the things that have happened so quickly. And the other piece of it is, while I think people wanted to go back to the old days of the good Trump economy in the first term, number one, that's hard to reconstitute. There's a lot of things that happen in the meantime. And two, frustration with Biden and the things he was unable to do don't necessarily, aren't immediately fixed just by changing who's in power. So the things that he was elected to do continue to fester from the American consumer standpoint. It's not necessarily his fault, but then when you compound it with things like the Iran conflict and a number of other things, I think those coalitions that helped elect him in both ways or in both times have frayed a little bit. And so there's 8 months to figure it out, but that's not helpful as we go to the polls and instances like this week.
Right, yeah, and it does seem like there's been some of the key groups that we famously lost by enormous numbers, especially ones that used to be Democratic strongholds and maybe seem to be coming back a little bit in these special elections that have been playing out. But, Latinos, young people, I think Trump made huge gains there, and those groups seem to be swinging sort of the hardest. Does that feel right? And how do you try to because I think there's a big question in Democratic world. It's like, did Donald Trump fundamentally remake coalition politics and or is this just a red hat party? And when he leaves,
And that is my take that and this is my lens on things, which is so much of Trump, and to the extent he has erred in term 2, is by thinking that his rented voters are owned voters, and those voters were here for a cup of coffee, and then the minute things didn't get better fast, they were like.
And we're like, hey, we've been renting those voters for 60 years. Give us our voters back. Yeah. And the voters are like, somebody please deliver something for us.
I hate to talk in riddles, and I think I'll probably do this a couple of times, but I really do think it's similar to the experience of Obama, where he did so well and was such a phenomenal political athlete that it, I think, allowed Democrats to kind of confuse what the Obama coalition is versus who our voters are. And it's very easy to understand the 2016 map if you use 2004 as your baseline, and you consider those 8 years a blip. It doesn't mean that the coalition didn't shift, because over that time you did get more of those high-end suburbs, and the Republicans did sort of trade for some legacy Dem groups. But at the marginal voter that turns it into either a winning coalition or a wave coalition, right. Those are the folks that you can't count on, you can't take for granted.
And it's totally right. I think it's a great analogy, because I mean one thing that we have been living with ever since is a similar dynamic where I think the 2012 election is kind of remarkable that with people still frustrated with how slow the recovery was going from the recession, that he was still able to win so handily against Romney. But in 2010, it was a bloodbath. 2014 was a bloodbath. And there was a similar thing where it was people really like Barack Obama, but the party there's erosion at the state level there, and the brand is, and then he obviously finishes his second term, and we have still not figured out how to fix the Democratic brand.
And it's a blessing and a curse, both in terms of riding the coattails of somebody popular or riding the backlash against somebody unpopular.
Right.
And that comes back around depending on it's a 2-year cycle, 6-year in Senate timelines. I think these things inevitably, people get paired back, and they're there for a variety of reasons, not necessarily because they own these voters indefinitely, but.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it seems like people are frustrated with both parties in a pretty, nobody's brand is good. The Democratic brand is bad. The Republican brand is bad. Trump is unpopular. Our leaders are unpopular.
It's very similar in that the signature feature of Republican voters for a long time there, maybe pre-Trump and maybe through Trump, was really disliking the Republican Party per se. And right now, Democratic voters, the people going out to vote against Republicans, they don't love the Democratic Party as such. They just really dislike this president and the party in power. So
totally,
how do you turn that into something durable? That's the riddle that everybody's trying to solve.
100%.
Yeah, that's totally right. I mean, and speaking of sort of post-Trump and once you get past this, once in a generation personality, where do you think MAGA and that, in Dem world, as it won't surprise you that there's a lot of the bottom is falling out on Donald Trump and JD Vance is toast and the MAGA media is turning on him and there's no, but that feels probably an extreme exaggeration, but I'm kind of curious.
Go. I was going to say, one example of this we can pull up is, Tucker Carlson this week, saying he's tormented. He goes on his show, he apologizes. We have this screenshot of the clip, I guess, which is not playing. But where, he basically says, I'm sorry I had anything to do with this. We were talking, in prep for the show, and you kind of mentioned, I didn't see that. And I do think there's, an interesting thing about how, the libs are like, this means it's over, and like, you know, it's like, it's another day, you know.
Well, this goes back to the fragmentation of media. I think of, you know, depends what your algorithm is, what your, you know, what your timeline looks like, what your feed looks like. But I do think, you know, in terms of that conversation, in terms of Tucker, I mean, think about his arc. And I told you, like, I read the Jason Zengerle book, which I actually think is very good in terms of understanding the arc of conservative media, the arc of the party, and how those two things interact. But as an avatar for this journey, you couldn't find a better one than Tucker Carlson, who's kind of perpetually stuck in 2004, where against his better judgment, you know, probably against his impulses and instincts, supports the president, and maybe, you know, is in that case supported the war, doesn't want to do it again, and, you know, flash forward 20 years, and that's kind of his imperative is keeping this from happening. And now, you know, I'm sure that sort of psychic pain is sort of forever there. But I think if you think about what happened in between, and this goes to the question of the future of the Republican Party, you know, what Trump kind of busted in on and disrupted in some ways was a party that was trying to figure out where to go in the wake of George W. Bush. And they didn't really figure that out. They just said, oh, we like this guy better because these guys are kind of, we don't like, if you think about the contest in 2012, 2008 to a lesser degree, and what it looked like, where it looked like it was heading into 2015 was really conventional, really orthodox, who could be more conservative. And what Trump did was prove, like, actually voters want something different. They're not a politician. They actually are, they find it refreshing, somebody that can do transgressive things from an ideological standpoint. Most voters don't think about politics with the kind of depth or coherence that we do, you know, on either side. And so they actually like it when you can come in and kind of kick the hornet's nest.
And it's funny you say that, because I think that the Democratic Party is totally ripe for that exact same kind of like outsider insurgent. Like, you know, we've been in the wilderness, rudderless, leaderless for a while now. And like, I totally think it's plausible, whether that's like a Mark Cuban or another celebrity or like
you heard it here first, Stephen A. Smith, our future nominee, you know,
but I could totally see it happening. Not, you know, maybe not Stephen A. Maybe it's not Mark Cuban. Maybe it's someone we don't know of. Maybe it's Sean Fain. Maybe it's the head of the UAW. Like, I could totally see that happening.
And that's what I've been looking for, is like, in my thesis, like broadly, is you guys are playing it out in a different sequence. You know, it's not exact mirror image, it's kind of a fun house mirror, but like grappling with the same things of, like, you know, a populist movement that's initially kind of earnest and thinks they're going to win, and they get smacked down. And then there's this kind of dark period where, you know, I mean, it's dark woke, right? Like that was their dark Tea Party was what kind of MAGA became. And I think, you know, that's what I wonder is when you have your best talent in the party arrayed on stage, but people are still looking for something else. We're seeing it in miniature with the Graham Plattners of the world.
Yeah.
People want something different. You kind of had that with Bernie. Bernie's kind of a Ron Paul analog, I guess.
Yeah.
But like without a figure like that, I don't know who it's going to be. Maybe it's an AOC. But again, it's still in the suit. It's still too conventional. If my theory is correct, it just feels like there's an opening for somebody else.
I think that's totally right. And it is interesting. If you think back, it's like, you know, we did our best to not have much of a primary in 2016. And Bernie, you know, came in as, we were kind of barely, me and Rob were both working for Hillary at the time. And like, you know, we were tracking when he launched his campaign, like Martin O'Malley seemed like the real, you know, the next best option, like that we were more worried about at the beginning. And then you see this, you know, cantankerous, you know, charming old socialist come in and come very close, you know, gave us a real scare. It was a real primary. And then in 2020, you know, Pete Buttigieg comes in as a gay mayor of South Bend, a city of 100,000 people, and he wins the Iowa caucus. So, like, I do think it's underrated how much the outsider thing has played from both parties. And Trump just obviously rode it to greater success. That, like, Bernie and Pete both came really close. But, yeah, I mean, so President Jennifer Welch, I've had it host. It's going to be great. Wine Mom
from the
City,
good state of Oklahoma. A Democratic convention in Oklahoma City would be kind of dope, actually.
It's going to be great. We're all going to be trans.
Well, I do think, though, that does raise sort of an interesting question about the Republican presidential primary, which, you know, I think whether it's wish casting, I mean, I have literally on this show said I think Tucker Carlson's going to be the nominee. It's not going to be JD Vance. You know, there's this, like, the tailwinds of the administration, right? I think there's the, like, is it going to be JD? Is it going to be Rubio? A lot of people are sort of selling on both of them. You know, on Kalshi, I think, you know, JD Vance is at 38% Rubio at 26, Tucker at 4.7 in third place, just above Trump Jr., baby. Run it back. And so, I just think it's interesting. I'm curious what you make of this. Like, I think, again, if you were to go on the corner of the internet that I exist on, it's JD Vance imploding, and all of it. Curious what you make of this.
I think there is and has been from the beginning a real desire and like a sort of schadenfreude, like looking for ways to write off JD Vance. And,
from where though? Like is it within the Republican coalition?
Sorry, no, I mean
He means
from the left.
I mean,
I see.
I think from the the media.
Yeah.
I just think
the lamestream media.
Yeah, and look, like if you think about how JD got here, part of the reason it was hard is because of the evolution there. Speedy evolution, like nobody really he was neither fish nor fowl, and so like that's always been a challenge. People have always had something to pick at, whether you were MAGA or whether you were a never Trumper. Like you had you could find ways to pick at it. But I think the fact that one, he did come in and win like out of the blue. I mean, this is a guy who'd never done politics before. And just sort of dives in at that level. Like that's really difficult to do. Number one, you can say Ohio's, it's a red state now. Okay, fine, but he was, that was a tough race.
Tim Ryan ran people thought Tim Ryan was a really strong candidate and was outrunning him for a lot of it.
Where is Tim Ryan now?
He shows up at conferences.
I was doing yoga in Youngstown or something.
Going to conferences.
Yeah,
but I think he has, whether people want to admit it or not. Mike DeWine ran ahead of him. Okay, fine. Like that's not really here or there. But I think the fact that he came in, won his seat, and leapt to this level of politics as quickly as he did means two things. Number one, irrespective of everything else, there is some innate talent there that not everybody possesses. Number two, that he has there is a curve here where he is only getting better. I personally think he is getting better as a politician. Part of this is me looking at JD Vance and sort of seeing something, one that I don't see elsewhere in the political landscape. We've been in boomer hell for decades. And so having somebody about our age that reflects back to me things that I see being a dad, I wouldn't say I know, JD Vance doesn't know me, but like his kids went to my school. I used to see him literally walking his son to school, holding hands and stuff. Like I've seen the human element of him that I think is appealing, hasn't been showcased in a way that it would be on a presidential.
Yeah, and I remember thinking even in 2024, to Rob's point, like there's a lot of Schadenfreude, there's a lot of like JD's the worst, and like I think I saw him get better in real time, and I had seen him on Fox News, and I was like, this guy's good. And then, and then all of a sudden you get thrown from like doing the friendly Fox News hit to like you're the second biggest face in the party. And he had a few rough moments like right after being announced. I remember people being like, he's going to throw him off the ticket and shit. And then by the time the vice presidential debate happened, like he kind of like totally outfoxed. I think Tim Walz expected him to be super hostile, and he came in and did the "I'm a nice guy" thing, and he just got better in general. Like I would watch his TV hits, I was like, this guy, he's just not. He has some political talent, clearly.
People don't want to hear that. It is kind of a Rorschach test, but I genuinely think he's better than people give him credit for. And I think the other piece of it is, he is set up in a way that under any, like, set aside what you think of JD Vance, like he is set up institutionally to be the obvious person. And so if you're rooting for someone else, you have to work backwards and imagine what changed to knock him off track. And with this president in office, like literally his whims could determine anything at any given point. So like you could never, put it past him. But what you also can't do is project in who you think the best person is, because that's just not how any of this works.
Right. You would, I think it would need to be like a total collapse. Like, I mean, obviously, as we said, Trump's approval is not at a good place right now, but he still maintains, 80% support or whatever from Republicans. And like, if you saw that hitting like below Bush at the end of his, in 04 levels, like maybe then you start to see the party. But I don't think Bush ever had the same like lock over
To me, the problem, and I think yes, but the problem to me isn't like that's less of a primary problem. It's that the nomination you get is worth less. It's been degraded by virtue of the fact that the president isn't as popular as he needs to be for Republicans to head into 2028 feeling good. It's hard enough to take the baton from a previous president without that baseline bad environment. But I just think people are trying to stir up drama. Like the Rubio thing is just pure nonsense. Like those guys are exponentially more likely to end up on a ticket together than they are like going head to head.
Interesting. You think there's like a possibility they just run and say we're running the admin back?
I know nothing. Like
I'm not saying insider.
But
yeah.
I don't think there's going to be a showdown. It's just not how they're built. Like they are genuinely friends. Their staff are genuinely friends. Like I think there is more likely to be coordination than there is like conflict.
Interesting.
And it just like if you think about the incentives of anyone who is currently in the good graces of Donald Trump that currently has enough time on this, moral coil to think about the future, like forcing it now doesn't make sense unless you're in a weird spot like a Ron DeSantis or a Marjorie Taylor Greene. Like the people with an incentive to force the issue are not people that are likely to get the blessing of the president. And that's like if you're trying to shoot the moon here, that's what you need to figure out. How am I going to bank shot into a situation where I get the Trump nomination? Unless, like you said, the wheels fall off and for some reason Republican voters don't like Donald Trump anymore. Like it's just even if you can snicker at his numbers, like the people who identify as Republican primary voters are going to like the Republican president.
Right.
I do think it's interesting though in the Vance thing last week, Steve Bannon rejecting JD Vance's MAGA heir. We have the article here. It was in the Independent influential podcast host, just like us, declines to back vice president as movement's next leader. I mean, what do you make of that? Oh, by the way, I want to highlight the other part, preferring to insist that Donald Trump can serve an unprecedented, unconstitutional third term. What do you?
He's been playing that card for a while.
He's playing that game. But what do you make of the fact that Bannon is a little ho hum on Vance? Does that reflect anything about MAGA and the third term of it all? Like, what is that?
So I hadn't seen that before, but what I did see yesterday was a headline from like the American Conservative. I think, look, talk about this in the context of the Virginia results.
Yeah.
But like, if you're upset about that and you think it was a screw up at high levels or whatever, you can't like blame the president for that. So there's a lot of like frustration, like displaced frustration, searching for a whipping boy.
Right.
And I think it's just, in that case, it's just kind of like who's the most convenient person to lay your frustrations on.
Right. It's kind of like the thing where anytime Republicans are frustrated enough that they feel like they have to say something on any given issue, and they're like, I just think the president clearly has gotten bad advice from someone else who is not the great man that he is.
Look, what I think is interesting is like Vance is clearly in an uncomfortable position by virtue of the fact that like his identity largely politically and otherwise is tied up in the fact that like he is someone who served during the Iraq and Afghanistan wars and came to regret those conflicts. And so he is not in his comfort zone in defending what's going on right here, but also he's charged with going in and negotiating some kind of resolution.
I actually think that, again, another thing that there's kind of been a lot of mockery about JD, from us included. It's, fun to be like, he goes to Hungary and Orban gets smoked and like he's killing popes all the time, whatever. It's just a fun game to play. But like, I actually think, there was a lot of snickering when he was like in a lot of stories being like, his people seem to be seeding the narrative that he, was kind of making the argument against the war. And I actually think that that's been pretty successful. And like, he has ended up in this place from my mind where it seems like he's been a good soldier and he's like doing everything he can. Mm-hmm. Also, like the Iranians want him to be negotiating because they believe that he wants it to get out of this war and never wanted to get into it. And he's kind of the best that you could imagine threading that needle. Like he does have I do have the I'm like, I wish JD Vance was just handling this because it seems like he wants to get out of there.
That's what he's for. Like I think you did. I'm curious. but I think that's
Rob's just mad because he's been told he looks like JD Vance after 2 days of Ozempic.
That's true. That is true.
But if you think of his utility, I think, and why Trump chose him, I think he likes him on TV. I think he sees and hears JD. And here's a version of his impulses reflected back him in a way that sounds nice and sounds coherent and polished, and he likes that. And so I think he actually respects his point of view. And if you're JD, like giving him your honest feedback and then saluting when he decides to do the other thing, like that's the best you can do. That's literally your job.
Right. Yeah. Right.
What do you make of the like Tucker of it all though? Because there is you can't, I don't know, again, this is me being an outsider. It does seem like Steve Bannon has his finger on the pulse of something, that corner of the party, like ultra MAGA, you know, it's not Trump, it's MAGA. Like that corner has something there.
Well, and I do think they're kind of parallel, but probably overlapping in some ways. Like if you think about, I guess everything's niche media at this point, and there's like the niche of the niche. But
You
like,
are the nichest media, baby.
I did so small.
We're talking to 100 sickos on Twitter right now, if that. Hello.
But these niches, I think, are like it doesn't need to be a mass proposition, but there is a passionate, acute sense in some quarters of like there's discontent, and like it's something that Trump was able to harness, and that can discontent. Those people don't want to be necessarily contented. Like these are general malcontents. Yeah. It's Bannon's whole thing, but that's what Tucker did. Was like you have a universe of people that watched. It's like, I go to my in-laws' house and like Fox News is just on its background noise, right? And so like they recognize Tucker and like Tucker because it was just on, but like they're not going to follow him to an alternative platform and watch him on streaming.
Right.
But if you think about the self-selected group of people that are seeking out Tucker, seeking out the War Room, Bannon, whatever, like that is, you are cultivating like a small but mighty and loud army of online sickos that can be used in a meaningful way. I think they're similar and they're playing with similar themes, but like if you're on Fox News, if you're on an outlet like that, I do think like doing Baghdad Bob stuff is part of the role, but like you don't have to do that if you're doing fan service of people who are pissed off, like reflecting back to them their feelings is like that's probably the move.
Yep.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And like, because the other thing that I found interesting about the Tucker thing is like, because I've seen Jason Zengerle, like who wrote this great book about Tucker Carlson, as you mentioned. You know, one of the things that he said when people ask him if he thinks Tucker will run in 2028 is like, no, because he's like actual friends with JD and like thinks highly of JD. And so it did make me think a little bit like, I don't think if you look at polling of the Republican base, like Tucker Carlson's a lot less popular than Donald Trump, you know, like so who knows if there's a play there, but it did seem like a little, maybe he just had a come to Jesus moment where he's like, I have sinned and I should not have supported Trump, but like, he's a pretty calculating individual who has like, you know, kind of always is skating to where the puck is heading. And it just made me think a little bit like, maybe he is starting to rethink the like, JD will do what I would do anyways. And he thinks there's an opportunity, but I don't know. What do you think?
You know, I think optionality is always like what, you know, smart people and people who, you know, want to, you know, leave themselves paths to power are optimizing for. You know, look, I think he has a good thing going and he's kind of growing this platform. Does the presidency, I'm sure there's an appeal to that at some level. Right. But honestly, if I only went back and listened to that episode because you guys mentioned put on this
because we're living out on here watching. Yeah,
they just seem to have like it's him and Buckley just like giggling like little girls, like, having fun. Like I don't know that sounded to me like a guy that was like plotting that way. I do think the Zengerle book is worth reading and very interesting, both in like jogging my memory and like placing things in a chronology, things that I generally mention or that I remember, but like kind of framing it out in a coherent way. Yeah. And you know, tracking back, like Tucker had misgivings about Trump from the beginning.
That was the other thing that made me laugh. Is he was like, I'm like, we're texting about how he's demonic and shit. Like, it's not like you just realized that you have these problems with him.
Part of this is like, the incentives are just such that I can say these things, and it actually my audience is ready to hear it. Like, I think a lot of that is just reading the room, and he's good at that. I think.
Yeah, definitely.
But I don't like. Does it give him like I don't think he minds the chatter. Yeah. You know, I think why would you foreclose it? Like if you're anybody, I don't care if you're a non-politician or a politician, somebody asks you if you want to run for president, you can be coy about that or play it down. You would never do anything to operationalize it at this stage. Right.
Can I ask one more question? Is there anyone else like in the broader Republican world? And I totally take your view that like if Vance, like I don't see Marco Rubio like being the nominee. I think it will either be Vance or it will be some, you know, remedy to Trump or to Trumpism or whatever. But are there other people in the party, like, you know, for me, like Josh Hawley, I think some of the populist stuff he's doing is interesting. I think Katie Britt has done an interesting job playing kind of like inside-outside game where you're not like fully Trumpy. Is there anyone else that's like up and coming in the party? Sarah Huckabee Sanders is impressive. Like,
I think these are all interesting figures that you might say who would pair well.
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know what
yeah.
I mean? Like because with all these guys, let's work backwards. Like
Yeah.
something happened.
Right.
How did that person jump the line? It's hard for me to wrap my head around it. But that's why I said, like, this is why I think that's why I told the Times, they sort of threw it to me the same way. I'm like, this is either going to be a very smooth, conventional, orderly path to JD Vance, or everything goes haywire and we just have no, like, confidently predicting that anybody but JD Vance is going to be the guy. Like, I would take, I'm taking JD over the field, and if you ask me to pick one person, like, I have absolutely no idea, because it doesn't make sense. It just means that everything's upside down, and I couldn't account for why that happened.
My dark horse is Dave Portnoy, Barstool.
Wow.
Could just be the Boston coming out of me.
But I think the instructive part about that is, like, that's why Tucker, like, it's not just that Tucker's, like, has a following. No, it's like the idea that people still don't want a politician. And they still want something outside of that realm. And that wouldn't surprise me at all. But, like, who would it be?
Yeah, I think Portnoy. Don't sleep on Portnoy.
Before we move on, it's so funny. I have this theory, which is, I mean, going back, that, like, if Trump were 65, he would try to run for a third term. Is that, like, there are people who are like, Obama should have run for a third term, you know, like, they're, you know, MSNB, you know, it's like, is that a real thing? Is it like, because we're obviously talking about this in the context of, like, of course, JD Vance, but, like, you know, Trump's playing with it a little bit, but I think he just likes to play with it, you know? It's, like, not a serious
but I do think it's optionality, right? Like, that he would tiptoe right up to it and indulge it and look for ways to preserve his prerogatives, like, you know. But it's like, would he have the kind of determination and discipline to, like, do what it took to satisfy the, you know, I don't even know how that would work.
Right.
Like,
Burn the Constitution.
but like, what you have members as a signaling exercise going out and introducing legislation. It's all a bit.
Right.
Like, a lot of things are a bit until
it's no longer a bit.
Talk yourself into it.
Right. We were pumping up Trump in primary in, like, 2015, and then it was
100%.
like, that was real.
I went to CPAC as we were just talking about this. We were both at CPAC in 2015, and I committed voter fraud and voted in the straw poll for Trump because I was like, that's hilarious.
We were, like, photoshopping, like, Trump onto the White House. Now he's like, I'm really the president. And I'm building a ballroom.
Now he's putting his banner up at the DOJ. You know, it's like serves you right, American Bridge.
That's what we get for trying to outsmart everyone.
Well, anyway, we move on from the Republican side to the Democratic side, which definitely still exists and is in very good shape. And we take a look at the ranch stack of the field. Gavin Newsom in the markets at 25%. AOC predicted at number 2. Ossoff in third. This is not reflective of necessarily the state of the polling, but that is what the folks who are predicting have to say about it. You know, pretty static generally. I feel like Ossoff has been ascendant in the last, like, couple of weeks, given you know, libs on Twitter,
given his viral speeches.
But you know, there was an interesting piece from Edward Isaac Dovere on Lina Khan, who is becoming a bit of a king queen maker in the field. The article saying why Democrats with 2028 hopes are calling Lina Khan and why she's telling them about remaking the economy. Lina Khan was the head of the FTC under Biden, where she was really focused. Well, she was sort of one of the biggest anti-monopolist names out there. She was, you know, sort of really aggressive from her seat of attempting to, you know, break up corporate power. This won her fans in Steve Bannon and JD Vance, but also a number of critics in the business community. In the article, Pete Buttigieg praising her, saying Democrats' vision should not be about picking up the shards of what this administration destroyed and trying to take them back together. But then Rahm Emanuel throwing a little hot water on it. Though it was sort of interesting, he says, basically buys her premise and then says it's not about Lina Khan. He says in every period of time in history that a concentration of wealth and economic structure is only accentuating that. The government has been a countervailing force. Rather than saying Lina Khan, which has its own explosion, the guiding light should be where Teddy Roosevelt was, more about regulation, and Woodrow Wilson was more about breaking out. That spirit is important, and that mindset. It's so funny when I talk to, like, business-minded Democrats, people act like Lina Khan was the single worst disaster in
Her
the
and
history
Gary
of Democrats.
Gensler, like,
Her and Gary
single-handedly
Gensler
destroyed
destroyed
the
the
American
Democratic
economy.
Party. It's interesting. And I thought her influence on the Mamdani administration has obviously been pretty well felt. Like, how do you? I do think there's this element of like everyone turning like the policy side of the party into like a level of celebrity is like a little bit the problem in the first place, Like, oh yes, we're going to make this about. I mean, I guess it is a little bit the Rahm Emanuel point. We're going to make this about a single person, and what do they think versus like a broad consensus about like economic concentration,
Yeah, but I mean, I do think that like there is clearly populist energy. I think on both sides of the aisle, and like I do think there's a reason that like Steve Bannon and JD Vance were like, she's the best person in the Biden admin. I do think that the 2028 Democratic nominee will be like someone who rails against corporate power and treats CEO billionaires and as a helpful enemy to rail against, and for real reason. I think wealth inequality has skyrocketed, and so I do also have a theory that Lina Khan, if AOC runs for president, that Lina Khan will run for Chuck Schumer's Senate seat, which is a hot take I have.
Is that speculative?
It's
or
totally
is that,
speculative.
Or are you managing the
Yeah.
campaign?
No, yeah, exactly.
yeah,
But go to
go to
Lina for New York. Just like but I think that populist energy is a real thing, and that like that railing against corporate consolidation of wealth will be something that is happening. But what do you think?
Well, it reminds me of Matt Iglesias had a piece this week that was basically like lamenting his generation of pundits, like preoccupation with white papers and policies in and of itself, and which I think part of the long tail of 2020 experience and like the litany of papers and the sprint to the left and like checking boxes for the groups like. That I think it's kind of part and parcel of the celebrification of kind of wonky. But I think directionally you're right. I think like it's how you parse that, right? Like how do you harness directionally that populist energy and the like anti-corporate sentiment without getting into the weeds of policies that may or may not be good ideas, but certainly aren't good electoral vectors.
But I do think it is interesting, given, JD Vance said she's smart. I don't agree with her on everything. There is the Bannon nexus of this. If JD Vance is the nominee, he is I think we saw this play out at DOJ where, there was a person close to Vance who was running antitrust and then got, booted or whatever.
Yeah, Gail Slater.
Yeah. I think that like, it is interesting to me that, you read this article and you see basically a consensus that, there is a concentration of corporate power on both sides. And so it's interesting to me as you think about the regulatory environment of no matter who wins, it does seem like there is some undercurrent, behind this.
Yeah,
that is bigger than Lina Khan, right? That is
definitely, definitely. I think the other thing that's like interesting about Lina is, I thought it was super smart for Mamdani to bring her into the admin. I think like a lot of the things that they tapped her to do is basically, and I was working on tech accountability stuff back in the day. She was kind of like a leading mind when it comes to tapping like dormant regulatory power, like power that exists that's on the law, on the books right now, and like. I think something that Trump did that we should all be modeling, frankly, Democrats when they win office is like demonstrating action in a very real and like visible way from day one. And I think it's been super interesting. Like Mamdani got her before he was even sworn in. She was like going through all of the laws on the books in New York to try to figure out like, can we go after junk fees? Can we go like what kind of like dormant power already exists in the existing regulatory state in New York? So I thought that was super smart and has allowed him to. He's been very Trumpian in terms of like he's like got a shovel and filling potholes himself, and he's like going around showing like I'm doing the shit that people care about on a day-to-day basis. So I think that piece of it is super interesting, and I think dovetails with this notion of like we got to help the little guy get ahead and like crack down on corporate bad actors. I think that will be necessary.
And it's true. It's like because the con way is like we're just going to use every lever of power to sort of serve as a countervailing force to the concentration of corporate power or anything like that. And I think so often in the Biden administration, sometimes we ended up boiling that down to like a very like I would always complain about how I remember when Biden did this video about what was it? with the chip bags not being full enough, you know, and it's like shrinkflation, and it's like, oh my god, like no, like can we please like do something about it? Not be like the bags of the chips are too, you know.
You shrinkflated his approval numbers, you know. Good job.
Sorry, Joe, but there is, you know, like I just think there's this element of like I do wonder if, you know, an administration that gives Lina Khan more influence probably succeeds more if there is more like, I am just like, the guns are out, I'm taking action, versus like being stuck with limited levers.
For the record, as a Republican consultant, I hope the party elevates Lina Khan and Gary Gensler as much as possible.
Yeah.
I fully encourage it.
It's incredible. I've seen her on so many podcasts, including like Adam Friedland, which is like a comedy podcast. Like, she is just like so buttoned up, and like she's like, I just fucking love writing like legal memos about how we can like take on corporate consolidation. And like Adam Friedland was being like, have you ever like gotten in trouble or like done a thing you're not supposed to do? She's like, I'd really like to stay focused on junk fees, you know? Like, I'm like, say one thing that you've done wrong. She's like, I can't do it. That's just not how I'm wired.
But can I ask about this though? Because I you know, whether or not going back to the thing about personality, and, you know, Lina Khan is being more of a voice because she, you know, is a I don't know, a lightning rod or something like that. The like concentration of power stuff, like actually as a Republican consultant, like would you advise that that's like a losing issue, or either politically, it's sort of in polling, or in the bigger picture of like, okay, all the puzzle pieces come together and the chamber's pissed at you, and, you know, X, Y, and Z business doesn't trust you. Like, how do you think about that, especially as JD Vance, President Vance, likely makes that something that he focuses on?
It's super unsettled right now.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's like one of the things, one of the unresolved issues that, you know, Trump and personally has managed to sort of like pull together is sort of legacy Republican pro-business ideals with a much more sort of populistic and you know, sort of impulsively anti-big anything.
Yeah.
You know, I think the sweet spot is, and the synthesis in some ways is like leaning into small business, like encouraging the things that people like. Because if you like, that's what all this is on both sides. It's all about trust, right? Institutional trust, the demise of trust in elite institutions, big institutions.
Yeah.
And if you see where there still is any kind of hope, any kind of trust, it's much more on the smaller side. It's in local, small, like that's where, like politically, that's where you want to lead. Is there sort of alpha to be scored by like picking the right foil? Sure. As a Republican, so I'm probably not very comfortable leaning too far into that.
Right.
But like the flip side of that is leaning into the things that people do like. And the question is like, what's more you know, effective? Is like leaning into like the sort of the dark side, or appealing to the things that people like. And like that's a delicate balance.
Yeah, 100%. All right, we move on to Ruben Gallego. A news story today. Gallego partied until the early morning on Colombia trip despite security warnings. The story saying that he went on a trip to Colombia, went to a dinner, decided to stay out after embassy staff received what they believed to be a credible report that there was a threat to Gallego's life. And his chief of staff messaging employees to come out. At least one employee told her State Department colleague she received a message from Gallego asking her to come out. You know, Ruben is having a rough go right now, but I will say, I went out and partied despite the threat on my life. That shows an absolute determination to a good time.
Dude, we need fighters. And a little death threat isn't going to stop this guy from ripping tequila shots. You got to respect that. I mean, yeah, he's got, like, it's hard to know what to make of stories like this. It's like, if there's credible death threats, I'm not going to the club. I'm also tired. I'm old. I'm tired. I can't go to the club. So that part of it is like raises my eyebrows a little bit, but it's also like, yeah, people go on trips and they go out to the bar, and like, would this ever have been a story if he's not already taking, rightfully, like a lot of heat over the Swalwell stuff and questions over like whether he knew anything? You know, I don't know. Sounds like a good time though.
If there was a death threat against me, I would not leave my couch. I'd go out. I barely want to go out now.
Right.
You know, like, oh my God.
In a vacuum, this is just sorry for being awesome.
Yeah.
In the context, it's just painting a picture that I don't know.
It does. It's not good. Yeah.
His staff just has to be like, when he went out there and sort of had that impromptu gaggle, like
Yeah.
it was just the cringe was very strong.
Yeah. The one thing I will say for him on that is like most Democrats would not have even, they would have just not put themselves in that situation. It's like, and I've been saying to people are like, what do you make of this? Is it fucking up his 2028 hopes? Because like I've written a lot of nice stuff about Gallego. I think he talks like a normal person. Like he won a state that we lost by like 8 points or something. Like he has a lot that is intriguing about him. This is also like a real problem. And what I keep saying is like, if he's being totally honest and there's nothing else that ever comes out, then I think he's handled it pretty well. But like he took a lot of hard lines there. That was like, I never knew anything that Swalwell did wrong. I've never fucked around. Like yada yada yada. And like if that all holds up, he's good. And if it doesn't, then it's like then he's got a credibility problem. Whether or not, even if it's just like, again in a vacuum, I don't think it's a career ender now to be like if he cheated on his wife or something like that. That's not necessarily a career ender, but it kind of is if you like stood there and were like, absolutely, this has never happened. And then it's like then shit starts coming out and you're like.
Yeah, and it's just the death by 1,000. I mean, this is the problem: is investigation after investigation, and it may yield very little, or it may yield a bunch of things that like look bad, but are not like certainly anything Swalwell level. But at that point, when you're thinking about vice president, you're thinking about other stuff. It's just like and so it is.
The only other reason that I'm like maybe there's not a lot of there is like they ran everything they could against him in 2024 in that Kerry Lake race. It was one of the top seats, on the map. And I think that like some of these guys that were like, there are rumors. I will say, I think like with the like, there's not rumors of like, this person was like drugging and raping people. Like that is a different level. If anyone knows that shit and is not telling people like that's a huge fucking problem. But there are people who you're like, it's no, just talked about like, oh, like he's kind of got some skeletons in the closet. You never know exactly what that means. But like a lot of those people are in states where it's like, they're in a blue or red plus 30 state, and it's like it never comes out until they like run for higher office. But Gallego, it's like you have to think if there's something there.
I'll say this: I think one of the things that I think kept Swalwell from actually kind of notwithstanding like the sort of
horrific,
the end was swift and brutal, but like and part of what inoculated him in the meantime was it became sort of a right wing meme, the Fang stuff, like. It was like old news and like nobody believed it because it was coming from certain quarters. I think that's kind of happening with Gallego where like there's a full on like theory on the right where like, oh, that's him in the picture and everything. So like I feel like there's a countervailing thing on the left where it'll probably be like to defend him as long as there's not other things out there.
But I think a lot of people are reticent because frankly, like he came out super early, which was stupid, like guns blazing, defending Swalwell before all of this stuff came out when it was just rumors. And I was like, that's not going to end well, which it very swiftly ended not well.
Not end well.
but then there's like stuff that's taken off that's like pictures of him and Swalwell on these camels and then you like zoom out and they're with their wives on also on camels. It's like, oh well, then it has like slightly different context. It's like a family vacation or something. Like, but it's hard to know. But if I was him for the next 3 months here, if there's a death threat on your life. Don't go to the club. Don't text female staffers. Like, just chill for a minute. Don't go to parties with Kash Patel or Pete Hegseth. Just stay silent. Don't black out. Like, trust me. I've had to navigate a lot of dicey situations in my life where people are like, Larry, if you fuck up one more time, and I'm like, all right, fine, I'll stop drinking for now.
Anyway, and then John Ossoff on Jen Psaki's show last night said he had zero interest in running for president in 2028. He loves serving the state of Georgia. A mildly Sherman-esque statement from a man who we definitely pumped up one show ago. What do you make of that?
Listen, I have genuinely always heard that he's certainly not as obsessed with 2028 as most
we are.
Democrats.
As the guys,
nobody's
as
as obsessed with it as me.
Making a podcast,
as the guy live
listening
blogging.
to every,
But like I have always heard that. Like he's not. He's also like 38. Like he's got a lot of time, and I think he's very focused on his Senate race. So I do totally believe that he's not thinking about it right now. I think that may change if he wins by like 8 points in Georgia, and everyone's like, "You're the only savior," or else we're gonna have Trump Jr. as president or whatever. Like it starts to get hard to like not be interested when a bunch of donors and stuff are telling you you're the guy. Like so, but I do believe him. I do take him at face value. I also like my Ossoff friends will kill me, but like they got to dial back the amount of times that he's fucking plugging John Ossoff, like electjohn.com or whatever. Like he goes on these hits and he's just like, donate to me. They're going to spend everything.
No,
I'm
dude,
like, dude.
hey, take it from the digital guy. Every time you do that, it makes so much goddamn money. It is worth
Saki
it.
the third time was like, yes, I think you mentioned it.
You mentioned the website. You got
Like,
it.
he's
It is.
basically only doing these hits to plug donations on his website.
It is. It is unbelievable the way when you do that, the like spikes that you see on Act. It's like bloop, it's like people are lemmings, man. You know. So subscribe to Nobody Knows Anything. Hit the button right now or follow our channel. Smash the like and subscribe.
I don't know. What do you make of Ossoff? And like, I mean, is he in safe territory in that Senate race? Do you see him?
That is a seat that Republicans should, in a neutral environment, with all things equal, they should be competing for that seat. I think between the amount of cash Ossoff's been able to bank,
With all those MS hits.
the ongoing, well, think about it. He built. I mean, number one, even running for the House against Handel in 2017, he built a great list then.
Yeah.
He builds a ginormous list in the runoff in 2021.
Yeah.
So he's cooking with gas. He's like operating on a presidential level at this point. But like he's gonna have a real race here, and like I don't think people are putting in the toss-up column, but like ordinarily it should be. Would be. We'll see who comes out of that.
It'll probably go to a runoff too, right? So they kind of got it dragged out, kind of like the inverse of what we were going to have in Michigan.
So like, but think like I'm trying to think of another senator who was in that mix where people are like, okay, the insiders are like, oh, he's going to be the guy. It's like best I can think of is like George Allen. Like the fastest way to put your seat in jeopardy is to get ahead of yourself and start thinking about what happens a cycle beyond.
And he's been good about that. I mean, like it's ironically like the thing that keeps going viral that is like convincing everyone he's the best candidate and like, oh, he's definitely running for 2028. I'm like, he's doing a rally in Augusta, Georgia, because he's running for a competitive Senate seat. So like in Georgia, so like that's what he's doing. But yeah, it's an interesting. Like I wonder. I kind of think Dooley would be the so on the Republican side, there's kind of like a three-way race with Mike Collins and Derek Dooley, who's a former football coach at Tennessee, and
Buddy Carter, go to Buddy Carter.
And Buddy, yeah, exactly, and Buddy Carter, and like. Kemp, interestingly, Brian Kemp, a very popular governor, Republican governor of Georgia, like picked Derek Dooley, and kind of like there was a lot of internal strife on the Republican side about not getting behind one candidate. But what do you make of that? I just generally think that, like per our earlier conversation, I'd rather be an outsider right now than an insider in general. And if I'm Ossoff, I'd rather run against just like a rank and file Republican House member than like a football coach that's got the outsider appeal. But I don't know. What do you make of that race?
I mean, my general principle in all this stuff is consolidating behind somebody.
Behind somebody,
it doesn't matter who. Like the way I think about these things, it's you want to coalesce the field as early as possible. Like worrying about who the optimal candidate is ends up with a situation where you get a suboptimal candidate, even if they would have been the best. Like once they go through that gauntlet, they're worse off and they're more broke. I mean, it's a frustrating experience. The Trump political operation found out the hard way in successive cycles. They've mostly done a good job of it here, but Georgia's the one obvious place where it's like, come on, guys, like this was the place where his pick would have mattered. And like I strongly support targeted victory client Buddy Carter, but like this is the one place on the map where it's just everywhere else you've got your guy. Like North Carolina, would there have been other potential candidates? Sure. Is Michael Whatley like better off as the one guy who can stockpile cash? Right. Absolutely, no question. So like, give me one of those guys, clear the field, and like that's your best bet.
Right. Yeah. Speaking of Buddy Carter and our friend Ruben Gallego, like I would like there to be maybe TMZ and DC can get on this. Can we get heights of every member of Congress? Like I did not know until I started tracking 2028 super closely that like Ruben's pretty short, Josh Shapiro's super short, obviously Rahm is short. Pete's like, 5'10", but it's just like a very funny thing.
5'10" is tall.
5'9". He's like 5'9".
If you say you're 5'10", what are you actually?
Yeah, that's right.
Exactly.
That's right. Honest.
I just would love to know the height of everything because I'm like learning and I'm like, oh, this guy's very small.
Until you get up on the podium,
and then you're like, exactly, and then you're like Ossoff's tall, strapping, handsome.
A couple episodes ago, you Jewish. Said lectern makers were going to have a great. I think Apple box makers are going to have an amazing 2028.
So true. So true.
Okay, moving on to Congress. Jesse.
Yeah. So you're the expert. You're the Hill expert here.
Yeah, I should say just before, like Liam, one of the most essential, not just blowing smoke because you're here and you generously donated time to a show, like a bunch of Make-A-Wish kids who are starting a podcast. Liam, one of the best follows on what is happening in Congress. I am constantly like, oh, that's interesting. So we wanted to make sure we dipped into Congress land really quick.
Yeah, and just so Senate has been moving forward a skinny reconciliation bill, which allows them to pass it with just Republican votes and clear the filibuster. This is to fund ICE and CBP through the rest of Trump's term. Still some consternation, concern about whether they can get this thing through the House. It seems like, I think they wrapped up, they did overnight voterama, as the kids call it, the kids being like Senate reporters. Where Democrats put forward a bunch of amendment votes that Republicans then have to be like, no, we don't care about consumers, whatever. But it's all kind of just a dog and pony show. And then, they passed this reconciliation bill with Republican votes, but now kind of goes to the House, where it seems like Mike Johnson's got his typical problem with Republican hardliners being like, fuck that. We're not just going to like swallow this shitburger that Thune sent over here. So yeah. Is that generally accurate? What do you think?
It is accurate, but I think you got to zoom out for a minute because there's so many things converging. I have to say, because I am a former recovering lobbyist, I've not been following this stuff as granularly as possible. So I had to get a prime. Shout out Sarah Donovan. I had to get a primer from my wife who's in the trenches here.
Love it.
Behind every man with a Twitter account, there is a woman who knows more than him.
She's not on S.com, so I pass off her content as my own. Perfect. But I think the interesting thing to think about is, a month or two ago, we would have said, why and how would you be doing another reconciliation package? And then the other question is like, well, if you did it, why would it be skinny? Well, the answers converge because both the political will and the political necessity comes from the fact that we don't have a funded Department of Homeland Security.
Right.
And Democrats will fund everything but the skinny piece.
CBP and ICE, yeah.
So all of a sudden, you have a Senate that has passed everything else.
Right.
A House that does not want to pass that Senate bill until they have some certainty. So the Senate needs to send over their budget resolution. Remember, this is the convoluted part of budget reconciliation, which is you can't actually write the law until you instruct the committees. You instruct the committees by attaching it to a budget resolution. That is still pending in the Senate. They're doing the vote-a-rama. It'll come over probably tomorrow.
Yeah.
Will it be easy in the House? No. Will it be pretty in the House? No. Will they pass in the House? Probably.
Yeah.
The Senate's the annoying part because you do have to go through the vote-a-rama process, and then you yield back your time, all that stuff. The House is much more straightforward than that. But remember, the other thing is here we don't have many weeks left in this work period.
Yeah.
And they've been kind of functioning despite a nominal shutdown, Department of Homeland Security. My understanding is, and I don't think I'm breaking news, but my understanding is they are running low on cash. So there's this race to get the budget resolution through and over to the House so that the House then will take up and pass the Senate. But remember, there's other things that are looming. There's the FISA bid.
Yes.
Which
oh my
the White
God.
House is trying to get through. There is there's a farm bill pending.
Yeah, there's a farm bill. There's potentially a supplemental for additional funding for the war.
I think that kind of hangs out. The reason it's skinny is that's what you need to fill in the gaps of. This is essentially a supplemental appropriations bill because Democrats won't let you do it through the 60 vote process.
Right.
But in terms of the timing, this stuff all has to happen here in short order. But you can't do one before this one before that one because there's no trust. There's no trust between the parties. There's no trust between the chambers. The old saying is the other party's the opposition, the other chamber's the enemy.
Right.
And that's kind of what's going on here.
Yeah.
So I think they do need that the House will pick up the Senate or instructions when they get them. They will pass the Senate bill at that point. They will hopefully process the FISA bit, and then we can kind of move on here. But
I will say two things. One is it does seem like Johnson and Thune have a particularly icy relationship. Maybe that's always the case, but they seem to be like at loggerheads a little bit.
You do hear
both very mild mannered, so they're not sorry, go ahead, Ro.
No, I was gonna say it's you used to have the old Chuck and Nancy bit. I feel like I never hear, they're not going to
Yeah,
tea together.
Chuck
right?
was always kind of like, it was like the Hannity and Combs, and he's Combs. I'm like, you're just like kind of a prop for Nancy here.
It's much easier to be the tag team when you have a foil in the White House,
right.
Yes.
and when it's the trifecta, especially like the election year end of the trifecta, when things are getting a little bit turbulent, like that's when
Right. And I will say I'm not a big Speaker Johnson fan, but he has time and time again, I've been like, there's no fucking way he gets this thing through. They've got like a couple vote margin, and like there's so many things they disagree on, and he's just like, I got it.
Well, I'd like to see Mikey Johnson wiggle out of this jam.
Exactly.
As a Mike Johnson fan,
there you go.
I will tell you, I enjoy that every time. But yeah, it's a tough job, and it's getting tougher.
Speaking of short kings,
I think they'll get it done. But I think where it gets, the FISA bit is probably the most interesting in that it is a pre-existing sore spot for like a Bush era legacy item that Trump like cares about, but doesn't like. It's not a driver. It's not a passion issue.
Right.
That's the interesting thing about the party, I think, is like members can they feel like they can discern like what he actually cares about. And so you can see the things where they like toe the line versus the things where they're willing to push back. And like the Freedom Caucus guys feel pretty strongly about this stuff. And so I think they'll get there, but not before you kind of have the airing of grievances.
I mean, sometimes it's not very hard to read. You don't have to read between the lines because he's like, nobody gives a shit about housing, you know? They're like, we have this big, like, bipartisan housing bill that's like a big fucking deal. And he's like, yeah, nobody gives a shit about that. But yeah, the other thing I think is interesting about what's happening now is, we talked a couple weeks ago, Rob, about before reconciliation was really on the table about the shutdown fight. And I expressed some frustration that, like, I think it's very clear that the incentives, especially during primary season, are for Democrats to just like refuse to work with Republicans on anything and to just like stand against any sort of compromise and be like, we fought them so hard. And then everyone was like beating their chests when Mike Johnson had kind of like refused to pass the Senate bill and then had to like eat shit and be like, okay, fine, we'll probably end up doing that. But like in the meantime, it's not like we were getting a massive compromise or a ton of concessions offered, but the whole point of the shutdown was ostensibly, a fight over the misbehavior of ICE, trying to get a bunch of constraints on ICE and CBP, and there were offers on the table to like try to work with them on, badges with names on them and like uniform stuff and wearing mandatory cameras at body cams and like a whole bunch of things where like it felt to me like there were concessions to win there, and like instead everyone acted like it was the greatest thing in the world that they got Mike Johnson to kind of like reverse course. And now if this goes through as we're saying it may well go through, like this is just funding ICE and CBP through the rest of Trump's term without a single concession and no leverage ever to come up again. So like,
but this sort of things begin to rhyme because I've seen a version.
You're
of
like,
this
oh
movie
man, I've been
before.
here.
It's like it goes back to the Boehner era, where Boehner could have delivered discrete, like half loaf type incremental wins, and at the end of the day, you have to decide like, do your voters actually want? Do they want like they're frustrated? Do they want to be satisfied, or do they want to be mad and they want to see that you reflect their anger?
Right.
And so, like there's a good government version of this and there's a good politics version of this.
Yeah.
But I do what my question to you guys, and I'd be very curious, like it probably doesn't make sense for there to be like a shutdown fight in September, although, I think Republicans have not enjoyed their experience in the previous shutdowns.
Yeah.
But I don't see, let's just say theoretically, if Democrats have a lever of power or both levers, how do they fund Donald Trump's government when they're in the majority? I can't see how that works.
It's gonna be
gonna be a fucking disaster.
It's gonna be a disaster.
Because I also, this is part of my thing, and like this is where I end up getting yelled at by every Democrat ever, whether it's on redistricting or whatever. Like, I do think at the end of the day, especially as the party that like wants government to work and be able to do things and needs to win back trust so that, we're like, we want to do universal health care, like run by the government. And like, people are like, you can't even fund the fucking TSA. So now I'm sitting in a 5-hour line. And like, I do think, one, I believe like government's job is to like make people's lives better. So like, I think there is a long-term risk to us where like the short-term incentives are to like fight as hard as you can. But like, then people get pissed off and they're like, well, nobody trusts Democrats. And like, oh, we can't like we need government to work. Like a lot of times Republicans are happy to let things break because they're like, yeah, we think government should be smaller. And like, we see it can't do anything. Like we want to privatize stuff. I worry a lot about a situation where like Jeffries and Schumer or whoever is the Senate majority leader, like maybe it's Brian Schatz, but they're like afraid to do anything to fund anything. And President JD Vance will be very happy about that.
Yeah, you put yourself in this position. Like we are able to, like, the Republicans, because you have every lever of power, own everything in a situation where we own a shutdown in the same way. So those dynamics are different. I think it feels like to me leadership's incentives are going to be to try to eke out some wins in the process, have a couple of things, and force Donald Trump to come to the table, which I think he'll have to. I mean, in that, it goes the other way. He will have to make some concessions, and if he doesn't, he'll pay the price for that. But, it's going to have to be the art of finding a couple of things that they can fight for, and it's going to be a mess. I'm really, I'm worried about it.
Yeah, and like there's going to be a lot of pressure to do impeachments. There's going to be like, I just think that like Trump is transactional, and like sometimes that's bad, sometimes it's good. And like if he looks at, he likes to talk about who's holding the cards, and if we're in a situation where it's like he's president and we have Democratic control of both houses of Congress, I think there are things that we could do that he would sign into law, or at least are worth making an honest effort on. And if he wants to veto a bunch of shit that's like raising the minimum wage and whatever else, go ahead.
So to that question, then that probably means you think the filibuster's gone? Like, is that like that's the kind of things where it's like,
I want the filibuster to be gone. I think that like government needs to be more responsive to the electorate, and so like even though it would be terrible and we would lose on a lot of policy fights, like if Republicans win a landslide election and they have all the control of all houses of Congress, like they should be able to enact the agenda that people voted for them, for. And so like, and if people, I think those things are unpopular and that would like redound to our favor. And I do obviously have concerns about like every 2 years you're just repealing whatever the last people did. Like that seems problematic too. But like, I think the filibuster will be gone. And I'm kind of surprised. It seems like maybe they just don't quite have the votes, but like, I thought it was going to fall,
Yeah, I thought these two. Yeah, seriously. Well, and here's the thing. I am get rid of the filibuster, but I am. I think the minute we have the next Democratic president and the Senate, like it has to go. And
that's part of the Republican argument.
Totally,
do it anyway,
totally. Yeah, totally. You heard it here first, Republicans. We're gonna do it.
We're gonna do it. But Rob, director of all Democrats.
Yeah. But no, I think that like from my perspective, like I think that the politics are so thermostatic that we're going to have, if we are so lucky to have control of the Senate and the presidency, we have like 2 years to do everything we want to do for the next 10. And so like, to me, I'm like, fuck it, blow it up. And I'm actually kind of like, at this point, Republicans, blow it up. You barely have the votes in the House. You do it. Like every time I hear the Republicans start to edge in that direction, I'm like, go for it. You do it. Then we can be like, they did it.
And like, I remember like in like January, February, March 2025, thinking like there was a massive opportunity for Trump to do like a border bill, and like, there's a bunch of stuff that would have put Democrats in a bind where I think a ton of them would have ended up voting for it. And then that stuff will stay in the law. If they had done a big like working class tax cut that wasn't, paired with Medicaid cuts and all, all the stuff that people are outraged about, and tax cuts for billionaires, like you could have gotten a bunch of Democrats to vote for like some of his main agenda items in a way where then he would have been like,
That maybe the most interesting thing about the difference a year makes, because a year ago, I think the lesson of 2024 was we can't just say no to Donald Trump and resist everything he does. But they didn't get put in many positions where that made it hard on him. And a year later, it's like, no, we just got to keep doing what we're doing. We don't need to change anything.
Right.
Which then sets you up for an interesting, like, 2027.
Right.
Like, if you won without changing anything and just saying Orange Man bad, like,
right.
I don't know how that informs.
Right. And you kind of saw it with like, now there's like Angie Craig is like wrote a whole op-ed apologizing for voting for the Lake and Riley Act because she's trying to win in the Minnesota Senate race in primary. And like, but that's, on immigration in particular, that was like where there was a lot of energy of Democrats being like, oh, fuck, we went way too far, which I think is true. I mean, I wouldn't have voted for the Lake and Riley Act, but this is why I'm not in the United States Senate. But like that was like kind of one of the few votes where I felt like that dynamic played out. And now, you know, fast forward to everything that happened in Minnesota and whatnot, and like Democrats, Ruben Gallego, Mark Kelly, Alyssa Slotkin, like they all voted for the Lake and Riley Act. John Ossoff voted for the Lake and Riley Act, and like, you know, that seemed like the right political play at the time. I think now they're all like running away from it, but it does raise the you know, it makes you think about like how many other votes they could have forced like that. Where and you're right, things have changed a lot since early 2025 when we were like, we gotta endorse some of the Trump things. Now they're like blocking everything.
All right, we are moving on to the midterms, the elections that are actually coming up. We had dueling media reservations today in the House, guys. This is the most consequential political story in America. House Majority PAC this morning announcing that, which is the Democratic super PAC that spends in House races, announcing that they had made $272 million in initial ad reservations for the midterms. So this is sort of pre-buying your ads. You can cancel them, but saying how much you're going to lay out for your ads as you go forward. At the very same time, CLF, the Republican side, announced $153.1 million in initial fall ad buys to protect the Republican House majority. So that is twice as much on the House side as the Dem side. Obviously, TV reservations, a little hypothetical based on, you know, you can say however much you want to spend and then pull it back. But the narrative coming into today, obviously, was the money mismatch between the Republican side, which has a shit ton more money sitting on the sidelines than the Democratic side, which is broke. So this is pretty interesting. James Blair, the Trump White House political director, saying this is fake. Democrats don't have this money. The Journal is acting like the DCCC press shop here. What's not fake is massive GOP money, which will make every House Dem fight for their political life. Republicans can sleep well. I mean
that is true.
It is.
I went and saw the FEC. I was like, I'm gonna look at the FEC report. I was like, they have only $50 million, so that's, you know, they need 5x that to pay for this ad buy. But yeah,
and House Majority PAC is making a bet that the money will be there at the end. Which, you know, like here's the thing. I think as you get closer to, this is not me like talking House Majority PAC's book, but it's like as you get closer to the election and it becomes clear that Democrats have a chance on the super PAC side where the money is much more transactional, you know, I think they are making a bet that money will come in later rather than earlier. The state of play, though, is tough, not just for HMP, for basically the entire Democratic field because of the Republican side.
They've been more successful at fundraising than, say, the DNC.
Yeah. Yes, I would say this sort of dovetails, I think, interestingly with Patrick Ruffini, who had an article in his, I think it's it looks like a Substack, his Substack, basically making the case, you know, he had laid out on Twitter before the ways that, you know, basically Republicans could win. His argument is essentially the most plausible path is negatively defining the Democrats, the kind of scorched earth campaign that Trump enjoys running and knows how to run. And so, you know, what does seem to be coming for Democrats, even though the wind is at the Democrats' back, is a shit ton of money disproportionately, a shit ton of ads, and a scorched earth campaign. I mean, the point that Ruffini is making in this article is doing the Biden thing of being like, well, the numbers are getting better, and, you know, and the chips, there's fewer of them, and there's more of them in the package. Like, that's actually not going to be the way. It's just burn down these awful Democrats because there's a lot of voters who hate the Democrats more. Yeah. That's the theory. I'm curious for the Republican view of this. Can the money make up the gap of the vibes? Is this just cope? Like, you know, it does feel like money can only make up so much.
Yeah, I mean, you optimize for what you have, right? Like, I think in any race you kind of have, and you know, going on the micro level, like you don't need the greatest candidate. You just can't have a disaster. You don't need all the money, but you certainly need to hit that threshold. You don't need the greatest environment, but it can't be, you know, a complete dumpster fire. And so it's kind of a sliding scale of all those things. And if you can amplify your spend, if you can be there with the resources, then I think that's, you know, that is what they need to lean into because the environment isn't great. They need to get the best candidates where they can. I think Patrick's absolutely right, but I think that's evergreen. Like,
Yeah.
going like put your outside groups coming in to try to prop you up in the positives, like that's probably not gonna, it's certainly not in this.
Tell it the future forward.
But I do think
Shots fired.
Particularly in an environment where voters are not crazy about the party in power, but they don't like the Democratic Party.
Yes.
It is easy to lean into those vulnerabilities and
Yeah.
play up the things that people don't like. Will it work? We'll have to see. I think the interesting thing is the playing field is, as we understand it, is super narrow. I think the HMP piece of that is interesting. They're playing offense in 80% of their theoretical funny money states or districts. But that's gonna be the question. Like, if Dems are gonna have the kind of night that they want to have, they're gonna have to bust out of the couple dozen seats that everybody understands to be super competitive.
Yeah, and I mean, Rob can attest. I'm very low. I'm very low on like Democrats in 2028, but I have been huffing the hopium on 2026. And so like I do think that we should be competing in those like Corey Mills R plus Republican plus 14 whatever 12 districts. I think we can expand the map that way. I mean, like I did laugh at the line. The most plausible path is negatively defining the Democrats. It was like, plausible path? We're negatively defining ourselves for 40 years running. Like, you don't need any help. But I agree with you that just like, there was just new Cook political polling across battleground districts that came out today. And I thought there were a couple interesting things there. Dems were like +6 in this suite of 36 districts that are Trump +2 districts. So, good swing there. And we have a little bit of an enthusiasm edge, but there was an interesting slide about how most Democrats were voting against Republicans and Trump, whereas there were more Republicans voting for Republicans and Trump. And so it does say to me that we still have this massive brand problem. And to your point, if we're super unpopular and nobody knows what we stand for, and then an avalanche of money comes in reminding people of all the things that they hate, it's like even if you're just keeping would-be Democratic voters home, that can't make a difference.
I don't know. It can, but I just think that the terrain here does not favor,
No,
like
I agree,
money on an unpopular message is.
What we're seeing, whether it's in Virginia, whether it was in the fall in Virginia and everywhere that had elections, like there's not a mobilization problem on the left.
Yeah, correct.
So can you depress some of that? Maybe, but people are just rapidly smashing the Act Blue button.
Yeah.
Give me the early
from
vote.
every country.
Exactly. Give me the mail. I want to do it the first day it's even possible. But look, I think the other piece of this is, Dem candidates are raising good money. It's the institutional money that's not there. Republicans have a huge partisan advantage in the outside groups. I think the other thing that we're not really talking about, not thinking about, is the outside. I mean, it used to be a cycle or two ago that like the only game in town was House Majority PAC, Senate Majority PAC, CLF, SLF. Now you have half a dozen $100 million, $200 million outside groups that aren't even necessarily partisan. They're coming in on an issue basis, picking races and playing in races based on things that we're not even like that aren't a clean cut parochial than partisan. So how that money comes in and chooses to manifest, like I think that's going to be really interesting.
And there's still this big looming question. I don't expect you're going to break any news here, but like MAGA
but if you
Inc.
do,
no, I don't know if you would have any insight anyways, but like MAGA Inc. is this Trump entity that's just sitting there with like $400 million and like they didn't spend on Virginia redistricting. They haven't spent in primaries, and people are just like, everyone's like, when is this money coming and where's it going? And nobody seems to know.
I think if MAGA Inc. spend in Virginia would have been an in-kind donation to
that's true.
Schamberger. But no, it is the question. And
that is tough when the name is literally MAGA Inc. Like you should have, you can
all
move,
their
you
ads
can
were
move the money.
featuring Obama anyways,
Exactly.
But I think that's particularly in an environment where, look, for Republicans to have a good night, his numbers just need to improve, period. But how they choose to use that spend, like I genuinely don't know. I think it could be really important,
right?
But man, I don't imagine that it'll be to the like narrow strategic advantage of the Republican Party as such. It's going to be furthering the president's.
Right.
And you got to imagine like 100 of that is going to polymarket bets about where they're going to spend. So
it is kind of like this paradox where it's like, to win, you guys have to juice you got to get that Trump base to turn out. and at the same time, like making Trump front and center is a tough, it's a tough situation.
You're gonna wear it either way, so you
Right.
might as well lean into it and take
Right.
it for what it's worth. Like Republicans are not yet comfortable with the idea that they need all the people to vote,
Right.
as many as possible.
Right,
They're
right,
still
right.
in a mindset where it's like there's such self-doubt over
Yeah, yeah.
whether like more is better, and the obvious answer is
Yes.
these days it is, because the Dems are voting anyway.
Right.
So you need to bring that marginal voter out. He might not be a Republican, but he's more likely to be a Republican than the people that already voted.
100%.
Our
which
marginal-
is why I think we need to pass the SAVE Act.
Yeah.
With important,
Exactly.
with critical
Exactly.
restrictions.
If you don't have a passport,
If you don't have a
why are you
passport
even here?
stamped twice, if you don't have a New Yorker tote bag, you are not
exactly.
voting,
Our marginal
because that
voter,
is how we know.
Our marginal voter like went to Harvard but didn't get into Yale law. That's like what we've been reduced to.
Jesse, do you want to take the
Yeah,
midterms?
yeah. I mean, like, we're going along here, but that's because we got the best guest we've had so far. There was this Jonathan Martin piece the other day about that I thought was really smart, as is typical of J Mart. There's a bunch of Trump tests coming up that are going to test like his power. That how much does a Trump endorsement still just single-handedly determine every primary? We've got these Indiana legislative primaries coming up where he's trying to oust a bunch of people that didn't get on board with redistricting, and then Louisiana Senate where he's behind Letlow, who's running against Bill Cassidy and John Fleming, and then the Massey primary in Kentucky where he's trying to oust Massey. Just kind of curious, like, do you think that, I don't know, what are your thoughts on this stuff, and like, do you think it fundamentally changes how people are dealing with Trump if these, if some of the Trump foes are victorious?
I don't think the outcome matters. The fact that we're even talking about it is the fascinating part. Like the fact that you have state legislators in a deep red state picking that fight, and then trying to live to tell about it is confounding in its own right. I asked a friend if they had a take. He's basically like, if the president's like ongoing power rests on a state senate election in Indiana, like we're already
you're already cooked.
Finished.
Right.
But I think it's more the fact of it that's interesting. There's even like a kind of remnant that's trying to fight against him. To what end, I'm not really sure.
Right.
Parochialism, I guess, in Indiana, but there's like a Pence background in the or in the underlying piece of it. Louisiana is much more straightforward in that no one is really tested this yet. Like Romney saw the writing on the wall; he was ready to go.
Right.
No one who in the House races, the only places where it's happened are in like top 2 states where like
Right.
Newhouse and Valadez, like Washington, California, are just fundamentally different. You're not going to win a Republican primary, but you don't have to necessarily in those states. In Louisiana, guess what? You suddenly have to win a Republican primary.
Yeah.
For better or for worse, it's not looking like it's going to be Bill Cassidy's fate.
Right.
I don't think any of these are going to dictate like how strong he still is, but the fact that we're having the fight, I think, tells you that it's even a question.
Right.
Is
Right.
indicative of where we are.
Yeah, right. The typical play is like Donald Trump's bad and also I resign.
Yeah.
like Bob Corker, Jeff Flake.
But look, like you can go back to 2017, like Alabama Senate. Like there have been weird dynamics at play where the base just does what it wants to do, irrespective of what the president wants, even at the peak of his powers.
Right. Yeah.
Before we move on, we should talk really quickly about Maine, where Donald Trump's low Maine approvals are making things hard for Susan Collins. I think it is sort of interesting the ways in which so much of this primary is teed up in the lens of like what's happening on the Dem side, but everyone sort of forgets that there's like an absolute slayer of dreams on the other side of this, and that Collins has really, like, she has outperformed polling every single time. So I just think it's an interesting situation, and yeah, curious for the read.
Susan Collins sits on the throne of skulls.
Yeah.
No, look, I think there is an underlying question. It has nothing to do with Susan Collins, and it really doesn't even have to do with Plattner or Mills. It's a fundamental question of, she obviously surprised the world in 2020, where she obviously has such a faithful and strong independent brand and sort of a faithful base there. People that don't vote based on D or R, they vote based on we know and trust Susan Collins. And I would bet on that until it doesn't happen.
Right.
And I think the real question is interesting for when I saw the Maine, like when I saw Mills even looking to get in, I had immediate 2000 Delaware flashbacks to Mike Gasp, who I loved dearly, was a great guy, would have made a great senator. But man, you could tell the minute that he got in that it just was not the right moment. It did not fit the zeitgeist. The test is Graham Plattner or Christine O'Donnell, right?
Right.
He's got some
He is
issues,
not a witch.
He's not a witch, but he's also not a Nazi. So that's
And also maybe
I'm
not an
not a Nazi
oysterman.
Yeah.
but I think it really just does. This is a binary of like, are people still voting on the candidate, or are they voting just on like base partisan instincts? And that'll be the test of the main electorate.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I do think there are a lot of these races where, you know, we talked last time, I was gassing up long shots like Mississippi and South Carolina, but like the last time all of these races happened was in 2020, and Trump was juicing that Republican-based turnout. And it will be interesting to me to see how a Susan Collins fares when some of those people don't show up and our beloved philosophy majors dominate the electorate.
Yeah.
And I also think that there's an interesting dynamic with Graham Plattner where you could imagine the sort of Jared Golden district voter being for him, but the coast being a little bit scandalized, like the Shelley Pingree crowd. So there's actually kind of an interesting cross current there that I find interesting. But like it really just tracks along. Okay, where are we in this era? 2020 felt like kind of peak resistance, sort of anti-Trump sentiment. Are we further along now? I mean, or have things kind of plateaued? I'm just not sure.
Right. Yeah.
The Senate odds on the predictive markets have it basically a dead even race. I cannot bring myself to believe that is the case, but it just sort of is starting to feel like things are breaking in the right direction. I'm curious the view of this from the Republican side. What is the steel man case for Republicans on the Senate? Is it even a steel man case? Like, is it crazy for Democrats to be in a position where we're thinking about winning the Senate?
It's not crazy. I mean, look, like the Republicans have a 3-seat cushion, right? And so the question is where that 4th seat comes from for Democrats. It's easy enough to count to 2 just based on like thinking about the battlegrounds. Like, obviously Maine is a state that they won presidentially. You could imagine winning that. Maybe it's easier to win North Carolina, an open seat in a state where they've not been able to win since 2008, but certainly been nipping at the heels. Roy Cooper has more money than God. In a neutral environment, they can feel okay about that one. So you get to 2 reasonably easy. The question is, okay, where's 3? Where's 4? You obviously can't give any back. So that's where we get into Georgia. That's where we get into Michigan, New Hampshire. Those are states that would be competitive in a neutral environment.
Right.
In an environment where Democrats are winning in North Carolina or Maine, then those are probably much tougher lifts. But it goes back to Michigan primary, like things like that. I think there are multiple races where Democrats are going to be faced with the same proposition that Republicans had every primary really since 2010 of, are we going to blow a winnable race by putting up a candidate that is not going to optimize?
Right. And I think one of the interesting things that's happening on our side is like there's more of a real question that's like, is an Abdul El-Sayed like a significantly weaker? I mean, the early polling indicates that he is weaker than McMorrow and Stevens, but like, this has happened with the Plattner stuff too. I was kind of early in saying like, and I certainly got blowback and have had to respond to many stories about his Reddit posts and whatnot when people were like, you still love this guy? I was like, all I'm saying is like, I think he's a stronger candidate in this environment to run against Susan Collins than like a 79-year-old governor. But I think I think that question is interesting. It's like, we don't really know. It's not like some of those races you were like, oh my God, if this witch lady wins, we are so toast. Whereas Democrats were like, who is electable anymore?
There's been 2 things at play. Number one, like Democrats have been the beneficiary so many times of Republicans just like shooting themselves in the foot in the primary that it looks like a one-sided thing.
Right.
And Chuck Schumer, until now, has always been able to work his will in the background, direct traffic such that these primaries don't break out into the open. So this is a first real test of what does it look like, what does it feel like if you leave seats on the table.
Right.
But again, like you need to get to 4. We've maybe gotten to 2. That's when you get in, okay, where's the next rung is much more difficult where you need one in Texas. Okay, Talrico is raising a ton of money. Maybe if you get Paxton, okay, theoretically, maybe. I don't think Republicans are going to let that one go. They'll spend there rather than, anywhere else.
Ohio, Alaska.
Okay. Similar, like Ohio is, Sherrod Brown, when he was invincible. Now that he's been beaten, I don't think it has the same thing. And what I'd say about Ohio as well as Alaska is, the other places are either open seat opportunities or even potentially like a primary upset. Beating an incumbent who doesn't have scandal, who's like kind of generic R. That depends almost entirely on the environment.
National atmospherics,
so I would, Houston's going to have a tough election.
Yeah.
But like I would still feel pretty good. Sherrod Brown, like this goes to those outside groups. Those outside groups are going to come in and nuke him.
Yep.
6 ways to Sunday. I think Democrats are really bullish on Alaska, and they got a great candidate. Like I tip my hat in that sense. But if you remember why Mary Peltola got to the House in the first place, is because she benefited, like ranked choice voting doesn't inherently benefit Democrats. It benefits Democrats when the Republican Party is divided.
Yeah,
why was the Republican Party divided? Because
Sarah
they got
Palin.
to choose between like literally Sarah Palin and like something that looked like a flavor of kind of bland Republicanism. That division itself led Mary Peltola to seem like some kind of like golden mean. And, we'll have to see what the environment looks like, but Dan Sullivan doesn't have any competition on the right. Like there's no similar dynamic there. She is a very good candidate for who she is, but it would have to be like on a night where she wins, I think a lot of bad things have happened. So like trying to cobble your way, this seat, that seat, I think it's just like, oh, the dam kind of broke and there's a number of seats rather than trying to one here, one there, one there.
Yeah.
I still think the funniest scenario will be when we flip the Senate by one seat and then John Fetterman immediately switches parties.
He's
Then we
waiting,
lose the
baby. He's
majority.
on deck.
It'd be like the most democratic way to
John
not
did
have the
come to me.
majority.
All right, we're running over, so one quick thing, and then we'll close. Obviously, redistricting on Tuesday. Democrats pulling it out, a narrow victory in Virginia's redistricting battle. Definitely a story of mobilization on the progressive side, but definitely some green shoots for Republicans as well. A internecine fight about whether folks should have spent between Mark Short in particular. MAGA groups are spending millions to primary Indiana state senators over a single seat, but hardly spent. Quickly, what is your take on redistricting, how it went down, how are Republicans feeling, and what do you make of this sort of the shots that are being fired at the White House team?
So, I mean, I think this is the surprise here was that Democrats would have the fortitude and political will to go this far.
Yeah.
I think that genuinely surprised Republicans when they started this thing. 5 seats in Texas, that's easy. Okay, they clap back in California. We'll just go to these other states. Indiana was the first squeaky wheel. Ohio, it hasn't panned out. There's a miscalculation both in terms of how easy it would be to get state legislators to draw districts that weren't their idea.
Right.
These are parochial exercises. So that was error one. Error two was not realizing just how the white hot rage of Democrats, and to Newsom's credit, like in the context of the 2028 and like trying to show you fight, like he kind of lit the way. And I think there was a lot of skepticism from Republicans and otherwise, like whether he could get away with that, either by passing it or legally or otherwise. And then people are like, wait, we can just do things. And so Virginia, the fascinating one there is that I keep coming back to is like the only reason they were able to do this was there was a special session that was called for the budget like a year and a half ago that never got gavelled. It was a Glenn Youngkin called session.
That's
and
amazing.
Just because they wouldn't have been able to call a new session because you needed 2/3 of the votes.
Right.
But because that session had never technically adjourned, they were able to just go like, yeah, we're going to do it. And so
Crazy.
That's 4 seats right there.
Yep.
And in a house where you have a 3-seat advantage, I mean, that's literally the difference.
Yeah. Are Republicans feeling? Is there a feeling in some corners of the Republican Party of like, oops, like shouldn't have done this, or
I don't think it wasn't a broad-based Republican idea. It was a White House thinking, this might not be a great cycle. We don't want to go through, like, we need to structurally reinforce whatever we can to maintain our majorities. And as a tactical matter, that makes perfect sense. As a strategic matter, it relies on you assuming you have more political fortitude than the other side. So I think it misreads like the incentives for Democrats. And the other piece of this is no matter how this netted out, like Republicans pick up 5 on net, that's all on paper. You still have to go out and win the races.
Right.
Yeah.
So like part of this, I've seen people who are mad say, like, we need to go out and do what Virginia did. We're going to draw like all the seats red in this district. Like, that is setting yourself up for, in a bad election cycle, losing more seats. Yeah.
And they already did it. One last thing before we go. Rich McCormick with a very funny proposal to make DC square again by bringing Arlington and Alexandria back in. Such a great little like Republican clever thing. You know what? I'll take it, man. You know, if it means you know, we can make DC a state, we'll do it. You know?
I have a whole thing about how I want to unify Dakota. Bring
I
Dakota
agree.
back together.
I think that's right. If we make DC
Was
square,
the West Wing subplot?
it might have been.
Probably.
It might have been.
I own a lot of onedakota.org and other such things. You know, like
You're a single issue voter.
Oh yeah, I just want Dakotans to be unified again. You know.
Thank you guys for tuning in again to our silly little show. You guys are truly sickos. Thank you to Liam Donovan for coming on. Really appreciate the time. And Jesse, you know, whatever.
I was fine.
You're fine.
No, this was awesome. Thanks for coming, man.
Thanks for coming on. Tune in Sunday night for more Where That Came From. Thanks so much.